video will show you how to calculate the contribution margin per unit as well as the contribution margin ratio. The problem you have to work through is this problem right here on the screen, and this video will walk you through requirements 2, 3, and 4, which are to calculate the contribution margin per unit, calculate the contribution margin ratio, and to figure out what would happen to our profit if our sales go up by $500 and our costs don't change in proportion to what they were prior. So what I've done here on this spreadsheet is I've pulled over this cost, volume, profit, income statement that we created in the first requirement, and I've made up some calculations down here where I will actually compute the contribution margin per unit. Now what you're told in the problem, and you couldn't solve this otherwise, is that each hamburger sells for $2.25. So that's important because the contribution margin per unit calculation takes that sales price per unit and divides it by the variable cost. We actually subtract the variable cost per unit. So we need to know what our variable cost per unit is. And so first we have to figure out, well, how many hamburgers did we sell? Well, if we sold this much in sales and we're told that we only sell burgers, nothing else, no pop, no fries, very unrealistic, that we would have sold 7,148 hamburgers. Now I want variable cost per unit. Well, my variable costs are $10,471, and I can divide that by the number of hamburgers I sold, which I just figured out, which tells me each burger costs approximately $1.46.5. So this half cent will actually cause us some issues in terms of rounding, but we'll pull it over, 1.465. And so this tells me my contribution margin per unit is just over 78 cents, 79 cents. So you would take your sales price per unit, subtract variable cost per unit to come up with contribution margin per unit. Now the contribution margin ratio takes this contribution margin per unit and divides it by the selling price. The selling price is the $2.25. My contribution margin per unit then is going to be simply this divided by here, oops, 0.34894, and the decimal point probably goes on. So the problem also asks us to determine what would happen to this net income if we sold $500 more in hamburgers. Let me show you a couple of ways on how to calculate this. First, I'll just take this income statement, copy it over here, and I'll say, okay, now it's the next year, and instead of selling 16,083, we sold 16,583 because we sold $500 more of hamburgers. Well, my variable cost per unit, this way's getting kind of long, but how many hamburgers is that? Well, the burgers sell for $2.25 a piece. We'll pretend I didn't increase my price. That means I sold an odd number of hamburgers, and so therefore I take, to get my variable cost, this odd number of hamburgers, which again isn't realistic, and I multiply it by the variable cost per unit, and I get this as my variable cost. So the contribution margin takes my sales minus my variable cost, my fixed costs stay the same, and my net income went up to $376.47. So the answer would be that my profit increases by $174.47. An easier way to figure this out, this is the long way, is to take the contribution margin ratio, multiply that by the increase in sales dollars of $500. Oh, and look at that, I get $174.47 if I round, which is the exact same difference up here. So that walks you through calculating contribution margin per unit, contribution margin ratio, and understanding how costs and profit behave if volume changes.